"Don't hurt me," Apache woman whispered to the lonely cowboy that saved her from drowning. The wind howled across the barren plains of the New Mexico territory. Dark clouds gathered in the sky, threatening to break open with a storm. Ben Parker, a lone cowboy, sat atop his horse, staring out over the horizon. His boots were worn, his face weathered by the unforgiving sun, and his heart as lonely as the open desert. For years he'd wandered these lands, never finding a place to call home. The distant hum of the wind was his only company, but even that felt too loud sometimes. As the storm grew nearer, Ben urged his horse forward, seeking shelter in a nearby canyon. The rain began to fall, heavy at first, then harder, soaking through his weathered coat. The wind picked up again, swirling dirt and debris around him. It was a storm unlike any he'd seen before, fierce and unforgiving. He had to find shelter, quickly. Riding deeper into the canyon, Ben noticed something in the distance. At first he thought it was just another rock or tree caught in the wind, but as he drew closer, his heart skipped a beat. A figure, struggling against the current in the river below. Without a second thought, Ben spurred his horse into action, racing down the canyon wall. He had no idea who it was, but that didn't matter. There was someone in trouble, and it was up to him to help. The water was rising, rushing violently, and the stranger was being swept away. As he reached the river's edge, Ben jumped off his horse, slipping in the mud but managing to keep his footing. He dove into the water, fighting the fierce current as he swam toward the struggling figure. A woman, her long dark hair flowing like a wild river, her body fighting to stay afloat. She was close to going under, her hands flailing in the raging water. Ben's heart pounded in his chest. He reached out, his hand grabbing hers just as she disappeared beneath the surface. With a desperate yank, he pulled her toward him, his muscles straining against the current. The woman gasped for air, her eyes wide with panic. Ben's grip tightened, and he struggled to swim them both back to the bank. His chest burned from the effort, but he kept going, refusing to let her slip away. Finally, they made it to the shore, the storm still raging around them. Ben collapsed onto the muddy ground, gasping for air, the woman in his arms. She coughed and sputtered, but she was alive. Her eyes fluttered open, her gaze meeting his. Her expression was one of confusion, but also fear. She scrambled back, trying to push herself away from him, her voice hoarse as she whispered, "Don't hurt me." Ben froze, shocked by her words. He quickly pulled his hands back, realizing the woman was likely terrified after being saved from the violent river. Her eyes, dark and filled with both fear and sorrow, locked onto his, and for a brief moment they simply stared at each other. The rain continued to fall, but the world around them felt silent in that instant. "Easy now," Ben said softly, his voice calm, trying to reassure her. "I ain't here to hurt you. I just wanted to make sure you were safe." The woman looked at him skeptically, still keeping her distance. She was clearly terrified. But why? She had been in the water, struggling for her life, and he had just saved her. Yet something about her reaction told Ben there was more to this than just fear of drowning. She seemed to fear him. Why would you help me?" she whispered, her voice barely audible above the storm. "You don't know me." He didn't know why he had helped her, he just had. It wasn't in him to turn his back on someone in need, especially not a woman in a desperate situation. But her question lingered in the air, and it made him think about the kind of man he had become after all these years of isolation. I don't know," Ben admitted, wiping the rain from his face with his sleeve. "But I couldn't just leave you out here to drown." The woman seemed to consider his words carefully. Her eyes studied him, scanning him like she was searching for something. Was she sizing him up? He could feel her hesitation, but he wasn't sure what she was afraid of. "My name's Ben," he added, trying to ease the tension. "And you are?" But then she slowly lifted her gaze, her lips parting as she spoke, her voice still trembling. "Silver Moon." Ben's brows furrowed at the name. It was an unusual one, but it suited her in some way. Silver Moon. There was something about her that was almost ethereal, like a wild spirit that had been untamed by the world. "I'm not a threat," he said, repeating himself, hoping she would believe him. "I just want to make sure you're okay." Silver Moon's expression softened, just a little. She shifted her weight, still keeping her distance from Ben, but she no longer looked like she was going to run. She glanced up at the sky, her wet hair plastered to her face. "We need to get out of the rain," Ben said, standing and offering her a hand. "Come on. I've got a camp just up the trail." She hesitated for a long moment. Then, With a wary glance, she accepted his hand. Ben helped her to her feet, though she remained quiet, her eyes downcast. She was still afraid, but at least she wasn't trying to run. As they made their way back to his camp, Ben couldn't shake the feeling that he'd just saved someone much more complicated than he realized. The storm raged on, but the lonely cowboy and the Apache woman walked together into the unknown. Ben led Silver Moon through the rugged canyon path, his steps firm and purposeful despite the rain that continued to pour from the sky. The wind whipped around them, howling as it pressed against their soaked clothes, but they didn't speak. There was something about the silence that felt natural, even though Ben could sense the weight of Silver's fear hanging in the air. His camp was just a small, modest setup in a secluded part of the canyon, hidden from the world. It had always been enough for him: a small fire, a pot to cook over, and his old blanket. Nothing fancy, but it was his. His quiet space. Silver Moon glanced nervously at the ground, her feet moving quickly as if she feared falling behind. Ben knew she was still processing everything: the river, the storm, and now him, this stranger who had saved her life. He wondered for a moment what had brought her to this point. Why had she been alone in the storm? What had happened to her that made her so wary? "Here we are," Ben said as they reached the small clearing where his campfire crackled softly. The flames offered a welcome warmth, though the cold rain still made the air heavy. Ben immediately grabbed a nearby blanket, shaking it off and offering it to Silver. She hesitated, eyeing the blanket as if it might be some kind of trap, but eventually she took it, wrapping it around her shoulders with a soft sigh. Ben sat down by the fire, stretching his legs and gazing into the flames. He didn't speak at first, knowing that Silver likely needed space. After all, it wasn't easy to trust someone so quickly, especially when you were alone, hurt and soaked to the bone. "You must be freezing," Ben finally said, his voice breaking the silence. He nodded toward the fire. "I'll get something to eat. Then we can talk if you're ready." Silver Moon's eyes flickered over to him, still cautious but not quite as tense as before. She nodded once but still didn't speak. Ben respected that. He moved around the camp with the quiet movements of someone used to solitude. He worked on starting a small pot of beans over the fire, pulling out a few pieces of dried meat to add to the mix. As he worked, Ben noticed Silver staring into the fire, her eyes distant, lost in her own thoughts. There was a deep sadness there, a weariness that Ben couldn't place. She was young, but the look in her eyes told him that life had already been hard on her. He wondered who she was and where she came from. He had so many questions, but he knew better than to push. She would talk when she was ready. The fire crackled as the aroma of food filled the air. After a few moments, Ben looked over at her and offered the bowl of beans. Silver hesitated, then took it, her fingers brushing against his as she did. There was a strange softness in her touch, as if she were afraid of breaking something. "Thank you," she whispered quietly, but she said nothing more. She didn't meet his eyes. Instead, she took a seat on the other side of the fire, curling into herself slightly. She picked at the food, eating slowly, but there was an air of quiet gratitude in the gesture. Ben sat back against a nearby rock, leaning against it as he ate his own meal. He let the silence stretch on, not wanting to rush her. He had learned over the years that people didn't open up when you pushed them too hard. Trust had to be earned. The storm outside raged on, its roar muffling the silence between them, but it wasn't a cold silence. There was an unspoken understanding. The kind of understanding that came when two people were simply existing in the same space, not needing words to fill the gaps. After a while, Silver finished her meal and set the bowl aside. She sat in silence for a moment, staring into the fire. Ben didn't press her for conversation. He knew how it felt to be alone with your thoughts. Sometimes you just needed the quiet to heal. Finally, Silver spoke, her voice so soft that Ben almost didn't hear her. "Why did you save me?" Ben didn't hesitate. "I couldn't let you die out there. No one should face that alone. Not in the middle of a storm like this." She shook her head slightly, as if unsure of what to make of his words. "You're a stranger," she said, her voice almost accusing, though not harsh. "I don't understand why you'd risk your life for mine." Ben glanced at her, his gaze thoughtful. "Maybe it's just the way I was raised. My father always told me that you help those in need." No questions asked. Silver Moon looked away, her gaze turning to the ground. She rubbed the blanket tighter around her shoulders, as if seeking some kind of comfort from it. Ben could see that her mind was 1,000 miles away, caught in a web of thoughts and memories she wasn't ready to share. There was more to her story, more than she was letting on. He could feel it in the way she held herself, like she was carrying the weight of something she couldn't escape. "You don't have to tell me anything," Ben said gently. "But if you ever feel like talking, I'm here." Silver Moon didn't respond. But she gave him a brief, fleeting glance. It wasn't much, but it was something. Ben let it be. He didn't expect anything more from her tonight. The rain continued to pour outside, but the fire between them burned brightly. For the first time in a long while, Ben didn't feel so alone. And in the quiet, stormy night, something shifted between them. An unspoken understanding that both of them were hiding from the past, but maybe, just maybe, they were finding a way to heal together. As the night wore on, the storm began to ease. The rain slowed to a drizzle, the wind dying down to a soft whistle. The world outside felt calmer, as if the storm itself had come to rest. Ben and Silver sat in the warmth of the fire, each lost in their own thoughts, but for the first time in years, neither felt truly alone. The morning after the storm arrived slowly, with the first light of dawn breaking over the canyon walls. The sky was clear now, the air crisp and fresh from the rain. The world felt different, quieter somehow. The thunderous roar of the storm had faded into memory, leaving behind only the sound of birds calling in the distance and the soft rustling of wind through the trees. Ben woke early, as he always did, stretching his tired limbs and rubbing the sleep from his eyes. He looked across the fire to where Silver Moon still slept, curled up in the blanket he had given her. The fire had burned low during the night, but the warmth remained, and it cast a gentle glow on her face. She looked peaceful, a rare moment of calm after the storm's chaos. He stood up quietly, trying not to wake her, and walked over to his horse to check on it. It had been a long night, and the horse needed some rest after the hard ride in the storm. Ben tended to his horse with the care of someone who had no one else to rely on but the animals he took care of. As he worked, his thoughts drifted back to Silver Moon. Her name kept echoing in his mind, like a song he couldn't forget. What had brought her to this point? Why had she been so afraid? She had every right to be wary of him, a stranger, but there was something more to it. She wasn't just scared of being saved. There was a deeper fear in her eyes, a kind of sadness that made Ben wonder if she had been running from something, someone. When Ben returned to the fire, he saw that Silver was awake. She sat up slowly, stretching her arms and looking around, clearly confused for a moment as she remembered where she was. Her eyes met Ben's, and for a second there was a flicker of something between them, an unspoken understanding. "Good morning," Ben said, his voice gentle as he settled back down near the fire. Silver nodded, though she didn't speak right away. She still seemed distant, as if the weight of the night was still pressing down on her. Ben wasn't sure what to say, so he simply sat in silence, letting her take her time. The quiet stretched between them for a while, broken only by the sounds of the fire crackling and the wind rustling the trees. Finally, Silver spoke. I should be going," she said, her voice soft but firm. Ben frowned, his eyebrows furrowing in confusion. "You're welcome to stay as long as you need," he said. He didn't want her to feel like she had to leave, especially not so soon after what had happened. She needed time to heal. Silver shook her head, standing up and brushing the dirt from her clothes. "I can't stay here. I have to go," she repeated, her voice tinged with urgency. Ben didn't know what to make of her sudden decision. He had thought that the storm might have brought them closer, that the shared experience might allow for some connection, but she was pulling away. He could feel it, a wall rising between them. There was something she wasn't telling him, something she was running from. "Where are you going?" Ben asked, standing as well. He wasn't trying to stop her, but he couldn't let her leave without understanding more. "I'm going to find my people," she said, her eyes meeting his with a determined look. "I don't belong here. I don't belong with you." Ben felt a pang in his chest, though he didn't know why. He had only known her for a short time, but there was something about Silver Moon that stirred something deep inside him. Something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. The hope that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't as alone in this world as he had believed. "I don't understand," Ben said quietly. "You've been through a lot. You don't have to do this alone. You can stay here. I can help you." Silver looked away, her eyes narrowing as if struggling with an internal battle. She took a deep breath and, with a resigned look, finally spoke. "You don't understand, Ben. I'm not like you. I've done things. Things I'm not proud of. My people—" She paused, her voice cracking for just a moment. "They're not the same anymore. They're dangerous." Ben watched her closely, sensing the pain in her words. There was a story there, a deep one, but she wasn't ready to share it yet. He could see that much. Instead of pushing her further, he decided to change the subject. "You're safe here, Silver," Ben said softly, taking a few steps closer. "You don't need to go back out there. You've already been through enough." Silver shook her head again, more firmly this time. "I can't stay. It's not safe. You don't know what they're capable of. I'm not who you think I am. Ben could see the terror in her eyes, but there was also a quiet strength. She was determined, stubborn even, and that only made him more curious about her story. She wasn't just running from something, she was running towards something. I don't need to know everything, Ben said, his voice steady. But if you ever need someone to stand by you, I'll be here. Silver seemed to hesitate, her hand reaching out slightly, as if she were about to say something. But then, as quickly as it came, the moment passed. She turned away, pulling her blanket tightly around her and starting to walk toward the edge of the camp. Ben stood there for a long time, watching her retreating figure. He knew he couldn't force her to stay, but the feeling of helplessness gnawed at him. He had wanted to help her, to offer her a place of safety, but it seemed like she couldn't accept it. Not yet. As Silver walked away, Ben's mind raced. What had happened to her? What had made her so afraid? The questions burned in his chest, but he couldn't chase her down to get answers. She had made her choice. But Ben knew one thing for certain. She wasn't done with him yet. There was something pulling them together, something that neither of them could fully understand. And for the first time in a long while, Ben wasn't sure where his path was leading, but he wasn't about to let Silver Moon face whatever was waiting for her alone. Ben watched Silver Moon disappear into the horizon, the weight of her decision hanging in the air. He had wanted to offer her a place of refuge, a safe haven away from whatever haunted her, but Silver wasn't ready to accept it. Not yet. She had her reasons, and Ben could feel that they were tied to something deep, something he had yet to understand. He stood by the fire, the warmth of it not enough to ease the chill in his chest. The silence of the canyon felt different now, heavier, as if the world around him had grown quieter since she had walked away. There was no telling when, or if, she would return, but Ben couldn't shake the feeling that her story wasn't over. Not yet. The day passed slowly. Ben kept busy with small tasks around the camp, tending to his horse, checking the supplies, and fixing the small cracks in his gear. He tried to stay focused, but his mind kept drifting back to Silver. Where had she gone? Was she safe? Did she have anyone else? Or was she truly alone in the world? As the sun began to set, Ben's thoughts were interrupted by the distant sound of footsteps. He stiffened, standing up quickly, scanning the shadows. His heart raced for a moment, unsure whether the figure approaching was friend or foe. To his relief, it was Silver. She walked slowly toward the camp, her eyes on the ground, but there was a different look about her this time. She wasn't running. She wasn't fleeing. Instead, she seemed more resolved, as if she had made a decision. Ben's heart lifted slightly, though his expression remained neutral. "Thought you might be gone for good," he said, his voice steady but softer than he expected. Silver didn't answer right away. She stopped just outside the firelight, her silhouette framed against the fading light of the day. Her posture was tense, her body still carrying the burden of whatever was weighing on her. I didn't know where else to go," she said after a long pause. Her voice was quieter than before, almost as if she were ashamed. "I kept thinking about what you said, about not being alone." Ben didn't say anything. He simply stepped aside, motioning toward the fire. He knew she wasn't ready to talk yet, but she was back, and that was enough for now. Silver sat down by the fire, her gaze fixed on the flames. The crackling of the wood was the only sound between them for a while. The tension from earlier hadn't fully disappeared, but it seemed to have softened just a little. "I don't know what to do, Ben," Silver said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've been running my whole life, running from things I can't outrun anymore." Ben nodded slowly, understanding more than she realized. He knew what it was like to run, to keep moving, hoping that the past would stay behind you. But it didn't work that way. The past had a way of catching up no matter how fast you ran. "You don't have to run anymore," Ben said, his voice steady. "You can stay here. You can stay with me." Silver shook her head, her hands fidgeting in her lap. "I don't belong here. I don't belong anywhere," she muttered, her voice trembling. "I've made so many mistakes, and I can't go back. I can't undo the things I've done." Ben sat down next to her, his eyes soft but firm. "None of us can go back, but that doesn't mean we're stuck. We're still here, Silver. You're still here." "Yeah." For a long moment they sat in silence, the firelight flickering between them. Ben could feel the weight of Silver's past pressing down on her, but he didn't press her for answers. He didn't need to know everything. What mattered was that she had come back. What mattered was that, for the first time, she had stopped running. "I don't know how to person you think I am," Silver whispered, her voice breaking slightly. "I'm not who you think I am." Ben turned to her, his gaze gentle but unwavering. "I don't know who you are yet," he said. "But I know one thing. You don't have to do this alone." Silver's eyes filled with unshed tears, and for a moment Ben thought she might pull away, but instead she leaned forward, her forehead resting gently against his shoulder. She didn't speak, but the weight of her exhaustion and relief was enough. She had finally let herself rest, and Ben allowed her the space to do so. The night grew colder, but neither of them moved. The fire burned low, casting long shadows across the camp. In that quiet moment, Ben felt something shift between them, an understanding, a connection that had grown from the shared silence of the night. Neither of them was running anymore. Hours passed, and the fire flickered out. Silver had fallen asleep beside him, her breathing slow and steady. Ben stayed awake for a while longer, staring into the dying embers, his mind racing with thoughts of the past and the future. He didn't know what would happen next. He didn't know what Silver's past held, or what they would face together, but he knew. One thing, they had both survived the storm, and maybe, just maybe, they could both heal. As the first light of dawn began to break over the canyon once again, Ben stood up, careful not to wake Silver. He stretched his limbs, the quiet of the morning filling his senses. The storm had passed, and the world outside was still and calm. He glanced over at Silver, who was still curled up by the fire, her face peaceful in sleep. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be more challenges, more pain, and more ghosts from the past to face. But for now, they had this moment. They had each other, and that was enough.